Climate change. We hear about it a lot these days. Ever since elementary school, I remember hearing how if we don't do something soon, temperature fluctuations will affect vulnerable ecosystems, coastlines will flood, and plant and animal species will be severely threatened. But exactly how and when will it change? I'm concerned, and I don't see my peers, my school, my community, or the government paying close enough attention to the urgency of this issue, which is quite discomforting. For the last few decades, scientists have feared the 2°C mark, as this threshold is perceived as the amount the planet can heat up until its ecosystems and weather patterns begin to drastically alter. It is speculated that surpassing the 2°C mark could potentially result in wildfires averaging 4 to 8 times in size, a decrease in crop yields by as much as 30%, not only in the United States, but also in India and Africa, a decline in the availability of fresh water by 20%, and approximately 25% of plant and animal species would be at a severe risk of extinction, according to the National Research Council, which is an intergovernmental panel on climate change and the World Bank. I think that these effects are frightening, and I can't see how someone else could think otherwise. We are all responsible when it comes to finding a solution, but today I want to focus primarily on the responsibilities of corporations when dealing with climate change. As greenhouse gas emissions and environmentally destructive methods of increasing production are already making the effects of climate change more visible, the Paris Agreement, represented by 195 nations at the 21st Conference of the Parties of Paris, was adopted on December 12, 2015. 118 countries have signed and ratified the Paris Agreement. Its main objectives, mainly dealing with emission mitigation, are to limit a temperature increase by 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, strengthen the ability to adapt to challenges posed by climate change, and encourage developments to reduce climate change in ways that don't negatively interfere with the environment. In addition to what governments have agreed to do, what are businesses doing or willing to do on their own? So I thought about this for a while, and I've asked, what are the ethical and practical responsibilities of American corporations in order to comply with international initiatives regarding climate change? The unfortunate reality is that some people ignore their ethics and are more concerned about money and profits. But let's just make the reasonable assumption that the vast majority of people aren't unethical. What would be a legitimate argument against regulation? Well, limiting emissions requires large sums of money to transform companies and methods of production to comply with international initiatives. Since companies are run for profit, many people, no matter what their perspectives of climate change are, strongly believe that a substantial number of American corporations will focus their efforts on short-term profits and selfish interests as opposed to climate change-related investments. Additionally, prior to the Paris Climate Agreement in December 2015, governments around the world accomplished very little in terms of agreeing on global commitments to fight climate change, so there has already been a history of not doing enough. Even in several previous UN climate conferences, the business and financial communities did not have a strong voice. Now, even without a strong voice in international forums, many companies are trying to address emissions. About 81% of the world's largest 500 companies have already set targets for the future. But there's a problem. Of the 70 most energy-intensive companies in the world across the chemical, electric, and cement sectors, which are collectively responsible for about 5 to 10% of global emissions, only 6 of the 70 have created long-term goals. In addition, other Americans believe that this issue is not even of much importance. This view is based on the belief held by some, including Donald Trump, that the science today is flawed. President Trump does not accept the scientific evidence supporting that climate change is in fact real. Ever since the Ice Age, the Earth has continuously experienced cycles of abnormal weather patterns, with the environment experiencing excessive flooding, frequent volcanic eruptions, and significant temperature fluctuations. Therefore, he believes that the combination of man and greenhouse gases has a very trivial impact on the climate, and because the Earth has gone through periods of climate change in the past, people can do very little to benefit the health of the planet. Just a few weeks ago, in fact, President Trump submitted a budget proposal to Congress calling for budget cuts for the EPA by as much as 31%. If enacted, this would basically get rid of the federal government's role in addressing man-made climate change. Some programs, like Obama's Chief Climate Change Initiative, the Clean Power Plan, which would require a transition away from coal-fired power plants, would be wiped away completely. In early November, Donald Trump explained on the topic of global warming. The concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese in order to make U.S. manufacturing non-competitive. Now, when I heard the President of the United States say this, I felt alarmed and betrayed. My generation is going to have to deal with this expanding problem, and the fact that it is being dismissed by the nation's leaders is very disturbing to me. The future of the planet is being ignored because some portion of our national population believes that it would be a waste of money to address this issue now. Putting these rather discomforting views aside, the practical responsibilities of American corporations are numerous. Business managers work to generate new business, improve their products and services, and maximize recurring profits. But they also evaluate potential risks to their businesses in order to repeat and even increase their profits in future years. In regards to climate change initiatives, my research demonstrates that not only is it in the best interest of the planet to support regulation, it is also in the best interest of corporations and their investors. Investing now to slow climate change is good for the planet and good for business. Perhaps the most important industry, not only in the United States, but in the entire world, is the agricultural industry. And the urgency of climate change initiatives is escalating, as scientists predict that food production must increase by at least 70%, or significant reductions in wasted foods must be carried out by 2050 in order to meet the rising demand of food. For potato chips lovers, PepsiCo's recent developments in potato farming, for example, are proof that it is very possible to benefit the health of the planet while still increasing profits. Just a few of these new developments include innovative irrigation methods, the creation of iCrop technology, which enables growers to accurately track water application to their crops, new potato varieties, new crop storage techniques, use of renewable energy, reliance on fuel-efficient vehicles, and the creation of the Cool Farm tool, a greenhouse gas emissions calculator. When you eat a bag of chips or drink some soda, you don't think about how many resources and how much energy was used to produce both the food and the packaging that it required. But considering a company like PepsiCo, whose production numbers are very large, the company uses up quite a lot of water, energy, and resources to sustain the required productivity. The developments that PepsiCo is recently making help to reduce both greenhouse gas emissions as well as water usage by 50% on PepsiCo's potato farms in the United Kingdom. Although efforts to make these improvements requires large sums of money, the corporation's potato yields have significantly increased, which directly results in greater profits. On the other hand, if efforts to improve a company's sustainability are delayed for an extended period of time, they will face the issue of financially lagging behind other corporations that began earlier. But what exactly will happen if companies do not start to comply with international climate change initiatives that have emerged from the Paris Agreement? The disturbing answer is that nobody knows for sure. Ideally, this problem could be avoided if companies begin to try to meet concrete and realistic goals. But if these efforts are delayed, several things might happen in the future. One of the most probable possibilities is outside pressure from foreign nations on U.S. emission standards, especially Mexico, Canada, which is the United States' largest trading partner, China, and several other nations a part of the European Union. Many of the world's largest economies, including those of the EU, China, and Canada, have already begun to implement carbon pricing programs which charge excessive carbon dioxide emissions within their own nations. In the U.S., CO2 emissions make up approximately 80% of total greenhouse gas emissions. With speculation regarding Donald Trump and his thoughts on abandoning the Paris Climate Deal, dismantling the EPA, and revoking many of Obama's policies on climate change, countries that are placing costs on their own carbon emissions to meet international regulations settled at the Paris Climate Accord would likely complain that U.S. corporations responsible for a significant amount of carbon and greenhouse gas emissions are operating under unfair trade advantages as they continue production without deducting any costs for pollution. Mexico and other countries have already threatened to punish the United States with a detrimental carbon pollution tax on imports of American goods if Donald Trump decides to withdraw from the Paris deal. As a member of the upcoming generation, witnessing the continued decline of the planet's health, the lack of education about this issue in schools, and even the denial of the existence of climate change, it is in the best interest for the United States to incentivize using cap-and-trade policies. This would require corporations and industries that exceed carbon pollution levels to buy pollution permits from others that don't. Ironically, President Obama in 2010 failed to pass a cap-and-trade bill that included a carbon tariff on imports from other nations. Now, the United States may soon experience a similar reverse situation. Due to the fact that it is unknown, but quite likely, whether or not Trump will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord, it is also important to consider the ethical views of American corporations. Can we be confident that American corporations will seek new innovative ways to improve their methods to benefit the planet, or will strict regulations be necessary? It is quite possible that President Trump may remove many regulations on carbon and climate and greenhouse gas emissions, as well as on the frequent usage of limited natural resources. So it is crucial that American corporations understand the benefits of preparing early for the future. Many American corporations, including Mars, Nike, Levi Strauss, and Starbucks, have already begun to take the initiative to establish emission targets regardless of actions of the government. Kevin Rabinovich, the Global Sustainability Director at Mars, says in response to the possibility of Trump withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, "This doesn't change our commitments. We're doing this because we see a real business risk." I believe that in the future, U.S. corporations must set climate change goals even if government regulations don't force them to. In the case of PepsiCo, the ethical responsibility is to take action, and taking action also seems to be practical in the long run too. However, whether it's corporations taking action or us individuals, everyone needs to be more conscious of the environment. Even as a child, at home and at school, I was told that it is important to not waste food and water, to recycle and reuse, and even to make sure that I turn the light off when it's not needed. But simply knowing these little pieces of advice and actually acting are two very different things. Similarly, whether corporations set goals and actually strive to meet them, or whether they realize the importance of caring for the planet but failing to make this is the question, and we'll have to wait to figure out the answer. But all in all, the bottom line is that to do nothing is wrong, and Americans need to put pressure on doing the right thing. As a changemaker of the future, I know that it is crucial that my generation is informed and acts on this issue. So yes, I am optimistic that American corporations will do their part, but everyone, including companies, governments, and citizens, will all need to continue to adjust and make efforts to slow climate change, because the 2°C mark is getting closer and closer. In fact, on the rate at which we are progressing today, we are on track of reaching it before 2050.